Greetings, fair citizens. It is your friendly neighborhood Galaxy here, and today I am bringing you what will probably be the only video of mine that gets any views, and by far the most hated one, and that is because I'm going to be criticizing the Second Coming of Christ, commonly known as BioShock Infinite. Now, just a disclaimer out of the way, well, a couple disclaimers out of the way to begin. First things first, full spoilers for this entire video. If you have not played the game, please press the X button right now. And second thing second is I am too lazy to get images that correspond to whatever I'm saying because that would take up too much time, and yeah, I'm lazy, so you're gonna have to just deal with hearing me talk, and so just minimize this and go read an article and just hear me in the background, or whatever. I don't care. Anyway, let's hop into this. The first area where I feel BioShock Infinite really falters is in the development of major characters and ideas, to where no particular aspect ends up truly succeeding. Things like the songbird are, really important to the game, but we don't really see Songbird enough. We don't really develop a relationship with this character, and I don't mean like a friendly relationship, but he's not this all-powerful being that'll occasionally, come at you. You see him a couple times in, what are effectively cutscenes, but he's not some omnipresent threat. He's not something like the Big Daddy where you see him wandering around and you can choose to fight or engage. And now I'm not saying you should fight Songbird, but the times when Songbird is, you don't feel like when you're playing the game you are actively chased by Songbird, and it's clear that Elizabeth has some type of friendly relationship with the Songbird, but that only becomes apparent closer to the end of the game. It's not something that's really told to us throughout the story. It's like one detail that's told, a couple of times, and then we're supposed to feel something powerful between them. But just having it stated, Songbird was my friend, it doesn't really mean as much as it should. Another problem is that, Songbird isn't really explained enough. We know that he's part human, part machine, but why? Like, we don't know who the human is, so then why not just make it full machine? It's this question without an answer. Now, maybe that's going to come out in DLC later, but something like that shouldn't be saved for DLC. It's like the problem with Mass Effect 3 and like the Leviathan DLC. It's something that's critical to the story, but it's being cut out and saved for DLC. Other things that aren't developed enough are Fitzroy and Fink. I mean, you're introduced to these people and then they die, like, immediately. Their motivations, they're fairly one-dimensional. I mean, Fink, he's mean, but why is he mean? Maybe because it's 1912 America, but that's his only defining characteristic. We don't really get to interact with him or with Fitzroy before they die, as soon as we do finally become face-to-face with them. Another thing is that during the section in Finktown, I don't remember, whatever, Fink proposes that you should be a Pinkerton for him, and now what this kind of, implies is that you would have to make a decision, some type of moral choice, because we kind of get to see both sides of the, Founder versus Vox battle are kind of, a bit more gray. It's not quite as good and evil, but we don't have to make that decision. That plot thread is, sort of presented, I guess, as a way for us to tell, oh, by the way, Booker was a Pinkerton, but it doesn't really do much. It's this idea that never truly comes to fruition. And I can go really on about other characters in the game, about, Comstock, how he too kind of really lacks motivation for what he's doing. I mean, hey, my name's Comstock and I want to destroy the world. Okay, why? Well, because I can. I don't know. Maybe it's explained in like an audio log or something somewhere, but I'll get into that later, why that's problematic. Also, Booker, he's really more of a vehicle to tell the story. In terms of personality, he's really lacking. He's not an interesting character at all. He's got this backstory and he's critical to the story, but you only learn that out at the end, so your entire journey with Booker is faulted. And Elizabeth is definitely the star of the show in terms of the character, and she's very, very good, but there's not quite enough of her personality shining because she gets overshadowed by the story. And I know that to a lot of people, having a great story is more important than great characters, but for me it's the opposite. Having characters that you can really, attach to and who you get to see their personality shine more, that means more than having some complex tale. That's why when I play like freaking Paper Mario, I like it, because it's, fun characters, fun writing. It doesn't need to have this great epic tale attached to it. So, Elizabeth, I mean, she's really important to the story, but aspects of her personality that we were shown in the pre-release demo, like there was a time when she was like joking around in like a hat shop, those aspects don't make it to the final game. And I'm talking that one scene in particular doesn't need to be in the game, but just those things in general are missing from the experience as a whole. One of the really big issues that I find with BioShock Infinite, though, is that it wants to be both the story of Booker telling this complex narrative between Booker and Elizabeth Comstock, and also wants to tell the story of Columbia and about its rich history, but ultimately the game is too short to contain all these, grandiose ideas. And I don't mean that insulting like the game's length. The game's length is about like 12 hours, which, I mean, it's fine. I don't have that much of a problem with it for an adventure which is crafted with, care and attention to detail. But it means, though, that that aspect comes out to be a bit scattered. About I would say the first half of the game, before you go in through the tear in Finkton, where, you go to rescue Chen Li or whatever his name was, that is about Columbia. You're learning about Columbia and its history. It's a unique floating city with mixes of religion and politics and anti-Americanism, and it's really, this rich city. It's a living, breathing city. Even if I know some people are like, oh, the characters don't interact with you enough, and some of the areas don't feel living and breathing. That just comes out from game design. But as a whole, Columbia is a good city for the first half of the game. But for the second half of the game, the focus entirely shifts to Booker and Elizabeth, and Columbia becomes just a backdrop to fight in. The areas lose its personality and its charm. It becomes really more generic, as a series of places to fight in rather than this city which you are fighting in. Another thing is that one thing that they advertised, well, Ken Levine said, I suppose, was that with BioShock 1, you felt late to the party. The city already fell apart. And in BioShock Infinite, you would get to witness the fall of Columbia, which is like really cool, but in BioShock Infinite, it really doesn't happen. There is no fall of Columbia. You start off with it being Columbia, then you go through that halfway tear, and then Columbia is practically already fallen. You don't get to see this slow, gradual degradation, where did I come up with that? Degradation of the city. It happens so suddenly and so quickly. You really lose that feel. It's really a bit of a cop-out. I suppose it's due to, game length and game design. You can't feature the city falling and then do all these other grand things, but it just comes off short. That's my problem with BioShock Infinite as a whole. It's got all these phenomenal ideas, and it does a good job at all of them, but it focuses on doing so many things. It doesn't do one or two things extremely well. Like in a game like, I don't know, let's say Dishonored, it did the combat very, very well. Like the gameplay, the freedom. It did the the world is very unique and colorful with history. Those two aspects were done really well, but the writing was bad, the characters were bad, the main story was kind of mediocre. I mean, but because it did these two aspects, so well, to me that makes it a more memorable and likable experience. Another problem with BioShock Infinite, and this is going to be more so me personally, is the whole idea of multi-dimensional time travel storylines just, I feel, don't work, like, ever. And that's because the entire thing can feel like such an easy cop-out. It's an easy way out. You can make up things as you go along. For example, in BioShock Infinite, it's the whole idea of constants and variables. And a lot of the plot points in most of the things which appear at first, for me anyway, that were plot holes are kind of explained like through audio logs, and I'll get into a problem with that later. But it's often comes out as some type of cop-out. Oh, like the answer to everything is, oh, there's multiple dimensions. Oh, there's like that test machine. And they just make it up as they go along. Like Vigors. Oh, Vigors, they came from the machine. How did Elizabeth get her powers? Oh, her pinky was in 2 dimensions. It's like you get to make up your own rules as you go along. And to me, personally, that feels like cheating. And I know like every type of science fiction or fantasy can do this and does do this. But when you have that whole time travel multi-dimensional thing, it really comes off like everything is like that, because you don't have a set of established rules that you need to play by. For example, they introduce the idea of constants and variables, but it's not like constants are, the weather, and the variables are what the person chooses. Constants and variables are decided arbitrarily by the game developer for whatever suits the purpose of the game. For example, Booker choosing heads or tails is a variable, but the coin will always be on heads. That's a constant. But the Lutesses, whether Lutess is a boy or a girl, that's a variable, but everything else in their entire life is a constant. Like, you see the problem here? It's arbitrarily decided, and even though it's an explanation, I find it an unfulfilling explanation, a lacking explanation, one that really just kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth. As you explained it, but it's a cheap way out. A voice crack, but that's what I feel. I know it might not bother some people, but for me, that's quite a issue. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about with BioShock Infinite has to do with the storytelling technique. Now, it's the same as the original BioShock and System Shock 2 in that it's told through audio logs. But the difference is the main story of BioShock Infinite is critical. It's the main focus, and you need to get all these audio logs to understand it. It's a poor technique for storytelling in this context, because what really makes a good story in a video game is that you can get, I'm going to just completely quote Zero Punctuation Half-Life review here for a minute. You can pretty much completely go in as deep as you want. Now, when Yahtzee was talking about Half-Life, he was talking about how, if you wanted to, you could just have, Gordon Freeman fighting off an alien invasion and, going through just trying to live out his day or whatever, being thrust into this. Or, if you want to look deeper into it, you can learn more about the world and the conspiracies behind it and government involvement. You could get as deep into the story as you wanted. And if we look at the original BioShock, you can take it as the journey of Jack trying to get out of Rapture, and you can never pick up an audio log ever and be completely fine. But if you want to pick up the audio logs, if you want to learn about the story of the world, about Rapture, its fall, the motivations, more about the characters, you can. Even Dishonored, which had a fairly mediocre storyline, if you want to play through the entire game just going around being Corvo's quest for vengeance and saving the princess, you can. But if you want to learn more about the motivations of the Lord Regent, if you want to learn about the outsider, the world, its economy, like more about Dowd, you can do that. You can get deeper. With BioShock Infinite, it is a one-level story. You can't go deeper, and you can't go on a superficial level. There's only one story to go through, and now a lot of games, most games tell stories that way. Like Mass Effect had, a great tale of, Shepard trying to save the galaxy from the Reapers. That's a one-level story. You can't really go deeper into it. You can learn more about the Turians and whatnot through encyclopedias, but that's, not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, like, the main focus, in Mass Effect. If you want to, like, just read books or whatever, you can, but it's mostly about the quest of Shepard and saving the Reapers, or, Far Cry 3, I guess, Journey of Jason on the Island. I could just go on and on about different examples. But in those games, you're told everything you need. The game presents everything to you. It's a story. It's telling you a storyline. It's like if you're reading a book or whatever, here's a story, you're learning more about it, and this is what happens. it's not missable because everything is critical to this main level story. In BioShock Infinite, things are missable. You could miss an audio log. Now, you don't, and I don't mean like you can miss an audio log, because you were rushing through the game. You can scour the area and you can still like miss audio logs, some of which will have really important details to the storyline. Actually, a lot of them do have important details to the story. The audio logs are focused mainly on Elizabeth Booker Comstock, that multi-dimensional thing, the Lutesses, not about the story of Columbia. There are very few audio logs that if you don't pick up, you're not going to be missing anything, which I feel like is a terrible way to tell a story in a video game. I think it's an absolute terrible way. If you have a single level story, one that you can't choose how deep you want to get into, you have to tell it. You can't hide it. It's like taking the Mona Lisa, cutting it up into a bunch of pictures, and scattering them throughout the museum. It's like, you have this thing, just show it to us. It's clearly good when it's formed, but you don't form it properly. And maybe to some people that won't really bother them, but to me it's a huge, it's my number one issue with BioShock Infinite, is that the story, yeah, it's complex, but it's told poorly. Yeah, it's told like, unobtrusively through audio logs or whatever, but it's not the type of story which is told well in that unobtrusive fashion, because you can't go deeper with it. You can't take the story for as much as you want it to be. There's only one way to take the story, and the game developers are sort of preventing us from experiencing that to its fullest. And there we go. Thus ends this fairly substantially long video of what is wrong with BioShock Infinite. Now, I am sure that like 95% of you will completely disagree with me and say, hey, this is a phenomenal game, one of the best games ever. And yes, BioShock Infinite is a great game. It's probably going to be, game of the year for me. I mean, I did thoroughly enjoy my time with BioShock Infinite, but it is not the second coming of Christ. It is a flawed game, and it's not a flawed game like, Fallout 3, there's a lot of glitches or whatever. It has serious issues, and now these issues might not damper your experience. For example, for me with Dishonored, having, this fairly short length and having the poor storyline didn't bother me because I was focused more so on learning about the world and experiencing the freedom through gameplay. But, it's important to acknowledge that BioShock Infinite is a flawed game, and it's not like, there are a couple of nitpicks. I didn't even get into the gameplay, which I believe is, if this video gets like a bajillion views, which it won't, it'll get like 3, maybe I'll do a video of everything that's wrong with the gameplay, but I'm just focusing in on the storyline, which most people are like praising to be like, this is like one of the best in gaming, Ken Levine, look at that, you can hear Songbird and BioShock 1 and all those pre-release things that didn't make it into the game, they happened, but they happened in alternate dimensions. It's like, no, it's a game. It's a really good game. It's a great game. But BioShock Infinite has its problems, like everything else. And it's important to acknowledge them to make rational decisions about its quality. And, yeah, hey, feel free to disagree with me, post comments, dislikes, I really don't care. Just, go nuts in the comments section, whatever. I hope this all, helped you maybe think about the game slightly differently. And that's it. Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Galaxy out.